Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Two Rivers is so excited, and I'm a really emotional speaker, so if I cry, don't worry. I'm just crying. This panel means a lot to me because I believe food is our medicine, and if you can't get your medicine, you can't be healthy, and everybody should be able to eat healthy food. So I'm so grateful that you guys made it. Rose, thank you so much for helping coordinate this. I just want to do a quick PSA about what's coming up for the store, and then I'll turn it over to Rose. On Thursday, we're doing a benefit for Roosevelt High School athletic department. It's a talk on baseball. Rob Nair is a local author, and the book we're featuring is by Chris Beha. And then Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day. So go to your favorite independent bookstore day and support them. And I think I hit everything. So I'm going to turn it over to Rose and take me off somehow. And there you go.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to Shiny and Venus and Letty for being here today. I'm really excited to be part of this. A little bit about myself. I am a certified holistic nutritionist and been a part of 6 area Portland farmers markets. And I'm on the a member of the Oregon Farmers Market Association DEI committee. And I've recently been supporting a development of a farm collective on Savi's Island, and which is how I got connected to many of the speakers today. So about the flow of the conversation today, we really like to let it kind of fold organically, less of a panel and presentation, more of a conversation. So I'm going to first introduce what we mean when we're talking about food systems, give a little background there, and then I'll invite all of our speakers to introduce themselves, talk about their background and their work. And then throughout the conversation, we'll have time for questions that we've come up with that could help deepen the conversation, as well as other folks, if they want to type in a question into the Ask a Question box, we'll be able to answer those as best we can as well. And then at the end, we'll kind of wrap up with how people can get involved. We have a resource sheet that we will be sending out to folks if they're interested, or putting it up on Two River Bookstore's website for all these organizations, as well as other ones that people can connect with on how to become part of the solutions moving forward and to deepen their work in food equity and social justice as well. So let's talk about food systems. So the number one thing I want people to keep in mind when we're talking about food systems is that they are all interconnected with many aspects of life in general, and nothing is in isolation. Everything intersects and intertwines. It's a holistic system. And so this, of course, includes things like health and wellness, but also employment and economics and wealth, education, gentrification, housing, social justice, immigration, human rights. All these things are really connected to food systems. But the components of sustainable community food systems that I'd like to share with you are really small and mid-sized farms. The average size farm in Oregon is 400 acres, but we're really talking is like less than 20 acres, less than 10-acre farms, expanding those in Oregon. Close ties to farmers and customers. So this can look like CSAs, farmers markets, farm to school programs, things like that. Equitable access. This is to land ownership as well as the actual food at equitable prices. Food and agricultural businesses that create living wage jobs. Fair working conditions, and this is from farm to production to transportation to distribution and beyond. And then food and agricultural policies at both the state and the national level that support all of the above. So with that in mind, I'd like to open it up to our speakers to kind of introduce themselves. And if they want to touch on any of those topics, feel free to jump in there. So go ahead.
Hey y'all, my name is Shiny. I use she and her pronouns. I am a farmer and herbalist, a farmer's market manager, and a general rabble rouser and agitator for change. I think the thing that I would just put in really quickly, and then I want to sort of say hello to our other panelists, is that when we talk about the struggles and challenges within food systems, it's really easy to slip into the trap of talking about food systems as though they're broken. And what I really want to underscore up front is that systems, all systems are designed. And the food systems in this country work exactly the way they were designed to. They keep some people in a life of abundance and access to fresh and whole foods, and they relegate other people to scarcity. And so I just want to, like, as you're sort of filling in your understanding of what a food system is, ask you to bring that knowledge along with you, that they work exactly the way that they were designed to, and that's at the root of the problem.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll go next. My name is Venus Barnes. I use she, her pronouns. And I will mainly focus in my job currently right now on college students' food insecurities. So I don't believe college students eating top ramen through their educational career is a pathway to a rite of passage of just becoming economically inclined. So I work for Partners for Hunger-Free Oregon, and how I got there, I started off at PCC. One of the biggest campus is Sylvania, and I was in charge of the learning garden there. I did not know how to garden, so I YouTubed a lot of questions I had. I had a lot of help from the community of our students, and we formed a food justice cohort. And so we really focused 101, but just really talking about kind of what Shiny touched upon of food systems, having access to healthy food, who has it, who doesn't, asking those root causes analysis questions of like, why are so many students like food insecure? So we really focus on our college campus policies, and that's how we got involved with Partners for Hunger-Free Oregon, who I'm with today. They do a lot of work around legislations, not just for college students who most of the time get left out, including all those students in the identity centers, who I work closely with, the Multicultural Center, the Veterans Center, the Women's Center, all of these centers the college has to make sure navigating the college experience is a lot easier for them. But just really bringing that into the community as well. So I work with higher ed and communities like yourselves. So we really focus on food justice there. I'm also the Oregon Community Food System Network, which is a lot of like topics around like land use and policies here in the state of Oregon and federally. I'm on the board with Resolutions Northwest. We facilitate honest dialogue around race and racism and systematic oppression. We believe in, restorative justice and healthy communities. So
that's so interesting.
I don't know what else I'm in.
I was at Sylvania for 13 years. It's amazing that we did not have a connection there, because I knew the person who came after you.
Tara?
Yeah, Tara and I have been friends for quite a while. So I didn't know you there, but I just left PCC in June after 13 years to do farming and market management full time. And it's not surprising. Like a lot of folks who turn through higher ed, in particular community colleges, like, right, that community college mission, we're interacting with hunger and food insecurity and housing insecurity so much. Yeah, that's wild.
Oh, guys, I'm everywhere.
Yeah.
I like bleep it and then come out. Anyways.
Really good company. Hello, everyone. I'm Letty Chichisonia. Yeah. And I am a farmer. I'm an herbalist. I'm a dog worker. I have a dog on my lap right now. And I have a background. Please stop. I have a background in public health. I started doing community health education when I was 13, living in Chicago, around HIV prevention, specifically with at-risk youth, houseless youth, sex working youth. And yeah, so I started out passing out condoms on the street to young folks, and it really pissed off my parents, so I did it more. And then I ended up just in public health and working with houseless young folks, people my age, around accessing food and accessing medical healthcare services, mental health care services, and like access to food and medicine outside of these medical systems. So learning about herbs, learning about food as a way to heal our bodies, where to get food on the cheap, like where can you dumpster dive, that sort of stuff. And then I came to Portland and retired, became a dog walker and learned about herbs. And I was really fortunate to be part of the Beginning Farmers of Color internship program with Mudbone. As I was transitioning and learning about herbs from public health work, I found myself growing CSA shares with them, and then was also really moved by that and decided that I wanted to be a farmer, not just for food, but also for herbs, for medicinal herbs, knowing that a lot of the people who control where our herbs come from or who source our herbs are not necessarily of the communities that use them and buy them. And so it was really important to me to think about ways to grow our own medicine, because there's a big piece about that, where the energetics of that medicine, those herbs, come from, who's handling our plants, like where is there exploitation happening, is there an injustice that's connected to that, and are we putting that in our bodies? And so with that, and working with the Sacred Lattice Collective, I worked to find a few of my favorite farmers in the world and got to create this farm collective, the Raceme Farm Collective, that I get to be part of with Shiny and our other farmer, Sochi. So yeah, that's how we got here. It's a winding road.
I think all of the pathways through food and land justice work are always winding roads. You know, they always have this element of what Venus was talking about, of like, you blip in, you blip out again, you come, you stay for a minute, you come and you stayed for a whole long time and you're really exhausted. Because, right, like all of this work, as Venus was already saying, touches so many areas, you know. Food and land that grows food are so central to the human experience of being alive, of breathing, of consuming, and of being in community. Like, community for time immemorial has been about food and that notion of breaking bread together. And so it's not surprising, you know, when you get out there into communities of food and land workers, how varied the backgrounds and the paths are that get there. And I think that's why, in some ways, we have really rich and creative problem solving approaches, because people are drawing on all sorts of backgrounds, you know, higher ed, engineering, being a chemist, being a land worker, being an animal worker, you know, people draw on all of these things to come together. And I think that also speaks to the tension between, yes, librarians, that's me. I think that speaks to the tension around that notion of systems working exactly the way that they're designed, you know, because there's just so many inputs. And we are the kind of people who turn systems around and upside down and inside out and really examine them and work to dismantle them and hopefully build better systems. So one thing I'm hoping that we can talk about, as we're all acknowledging that, like, any systems is jacked, and exactly the way they're supposed to be, is like, what does a better system look like? Because I don't think anyone's advocating for a life without food systems, but we are advocating for a life with better food systems. And so, like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good point, and one that could probably expand for a long ways, right? Because we talked about it all connecting interchangeably. So that would mean like connecting to housing and to college education and all those facets, right? And so it does seem kind of complex and overwhelming, but I think that we're a good example of how all of us have been in different sections of this work, and we're all coming together to talk about these kinds of things. What, Shiny, since you posed that question, what do you feel like some of the main points from your perspective would be that needed to be addressed first in making that, what that would look like?
You know, a lot of what I'm thinking about, and I want to give a little hat tip that some of these thoughts I was really introduced to by a person named Sarah Mock, who has done some writing about food systems, and I think you can find some of their stuff out on like Medium. But I just fundamentally, I believe that people who can pay more for food should. Like there is no better food system that we get to. There is no equitable food system, which is different than equal food system, right? But there's no equitable food system we can get to that doesn't at some point involve people who have access, more ready access to fiscal resources, putting in more of them because they can. And so one of the things I've really been reading and thinking and learning about is gosh, the notion of how much food costs in this country is just so skewed and is so very disconnected from reality. And, as a market manager, and I think this is a place that, Rose, you have a lot of experience too, the consumer mindset around a farmer's market all day long is this narrative of like, gosh, the food here is really expensive. And so when I think about a better functioning food system, in addition to one where people who can pay more are paying more, I think it's one in which everybody is instead saying, wow, food in grocery stores is so cheap, but also we live in a very warped capitalist society and nothing is cheap. Nothing is ever cheap or free. So if it's arriving in the appearance of cheap at the grocery store, that means somebody else paid for it already. And so asking those questions about like who's really paying for this cheap food. But first we have to get to the place in community discourse and in narrative where we're acknowledging that like Fred Meyer is very, very cheap if you are talking about what it actually costs to produce food. And so, America loves to live on that like pyramid of, fast, cheap, and good. And so getting to a place where people are as well-versed and confident in asking like, hey, look, which one of these are you lopping off to get this to me? Like, is it fast? Is it cheaper? Is it good? That's not coming along, in the way that people in this country are really confident in asking, let's say like a plumber, who shows up and says, hey, I can fix your toilet for really cheap. People know enough to be there to say, hey, you're going to cut corners then. What happens? But people don't ask that question about food. And so part of it is just like a better food system is a much more transparent food system where people know that these things are going on and are able to ask these questions. If we can't ask questions, we can't have a dialogue.
Shani, I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, cutting corners is at a cost. And right now we're seeing, especially now today, during this crisis, it's a human cost. And we have to collectively ask ourselves, what are we willing to live with? And I'm not willing to live with the cost of my neighbors being sacrificed so that Fred Meyers can continue to cut corners. And the folks that are putting the food on our tables are at death and risk of not being able to survive just this time that we're in now, right? It's like we have to start looking at the root cause of these crises, and a lot of it stems from the white supremacy culture dominant narrative of like how capitalism works and who exists, black and brown people, so that non-black and brown people, BIPOC, can have more. So we have to really look at the fact that folks exist so that others can have more. And why? Why do we continue to sign off on that as a collective society? And what are we willing to, do about that? It looks like we might have lost.
It might be us.
It might be us.
I'm here. Christina's here. Oh, there's Letty.
There's Letty. I think everybody's having awkward Wi-Fi, which is like a sign of the pandemic times. Like the whole world is taxing bandwidth everywhere. Letty, are you still unable to hear us? I know they put in the chat that they weren't able to hear us. Hmm. Well, yeah, I do think, right, that it's impossible to unpack food systems and food justice work without talking about capitalism, without talking about capitalism, and without talking about white supremacist capitalism, which are, one and the same thing. And so when we talk about systems that are super opaque, right, capitalism and American capitalist democracy, and American white supremacist capitalist democracy is really at the top of the list of systems that folks who have been steeped and saturated in the cultures of this country really don't know how to make visible, right? Like making our thinking about these things visible is incredibly challenging when it is sort of the proverbial water in the fish tank, right? That we're all swimming in. But I think that's a place, and maybe this will be familiar for you, Venus, because I'm thinking a little bit about like community college ethos, right? And until we unpack financial literacy with people, then it's really hard to talk about food systems. It's really hard to talk about like why people often with great judgment are coming at folks talking about you should have bought a bag of beans, instead of a Big Mac or whatever. And so just this notion of cost, right? Like what it's costing my neighbor in the way that you were saying, what it's costing Fred Meyer, what it's costing, Black communities in terms of health outcomes and disparities. Like there are always these costs. And so everything is so tangled, and I don't know. And I do get overwhelmed, right? Like it can be very easy to talk about this in glib sound bites, but I think a lot of the work of food and land justice is feeling overwhelmed all the time and not sure how to even like unpack and disentangle all of these snarls and spaghetti for ourselves. So like, how do we, I'm interested in hearing, because I don't have one. Do you have like an elevator pitch? Like, how do you get into food systems talk with people? Because I'm just like, but it's money and it's whiteness and it's everything. And they're like, well, I got to go, Shiny. That's a lot.
That usually happens to me as well. I mean, there's so many aspects. It's so complex. And when you look at it from the, macro point of view, it is very overwhelming. It's like, how do you measure the universe? I mean, yeah, there is a measurement and it's mind-blowing, right? And then you come down to when you see our little tiny planet in the universe of the micro level of, Oregon itself, like our policies, our lawmakers, of how they move forward, and just in this time alone of like what the money that they've been allocated in this time and how they've distributed it. We can look at it on that macro point of view and analyze it then. But if we are not doing both at the same time simultaneously, we're going to miss that actual root cause analysis of why. Why is Oregon, other than, maybe Idaho, why is Oregon doing something so much different than Idaho? We have to have a collective understanding of really what it is that is hurting us as a whole. And, until we start unpacking and looking at it from that perspective, then how are we going to move together?
Right. Yeah. I see nodding, Letty. Can you hear us? Maybe you're back with us.
I can hear a little bit. I'm back. Sorry.
Yay. Oh.
I missed a lot, but I did hear what you were saying around the difference in our systems and our landscapes, like what's happening in Idaho versus what's happening in Oregon, what's happening in Illinois, what's happening in Philadelphia, right, or Pennsylvania. Sorry, I don't even think of it as a whole state even. Like, yeah, so who's doing what? And then also like who's doing the work? That's a big question I have when we're talking about our food systems. Who is doing the work and who's benefiting from the work? And like who's getting rich off of it?
Definitely.
I have around like when it comes to I always tell people I'm a bad capitalist. I'm terrible at being a capitalist because really I'm interested in doing the work. I want to grow the food. I want to build the connections, and I want to like do that emotional labor that comes with farming. I say this all the time. We grow community, but there's no money in that, and that's I think the difference in like how people operate. When people have access to resources, it's a lot easier to accumulate wealth. It's a lot easier to have that abundance. But when we're just working on finding our niche in the systems, when we're just relearning our languages, when we're just relearning our traditions, we're so set back that it is a lot of work, and there isn't a whole lot of payoff that we get to see and benefit from. Like that tree that I planted, I'm not going to be eating from it. Someone else will be. And that's, I think, difference of mentality, that difference of structures and systems and how they're set up.
Yeah, and I think we need to collectively ask ourselves as well, what are we defining success?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you mentioned follow the money. I can easy example of when we state by state slowly have legalized marijuana, and then we integrate these programs that say we need to have an equitable lens when we're reintegrating folks who've been, you know, marginalized and arrested under the same, you know, maritime or whatever dispensary wants to call themselves. They're still a dope dealer.
Right.
10 years ago, you know, it just happened to be owned majority wise in this country. Of all states that have made marijuana legal, 89% is owned by white men. But Black folks continually are, you know, impacted today. And it's like, we need to look at when we're trying to quote unquote integrate not only the folks that have been impacted by, you know, the laws around marijuana or the drug war, but when we're introducing systems to sort of correct it, being very careful about how we follow that money, because even today here in Oregon, we have these systems in place and only 2% of Black and brown folks get to own these dispensaries. And during this event that just happened, have lost their businesses because they're just the small minority when it comes to allocating money from the federal government, because you can't access that money if you're a felon, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like being really careful of how they put the icing on a shit cake, so to say. I'm sorry, I apologize, but
No.
like, that's real. I mean, we really need to start reassessing our core beliefs of this country that has been built on just that: genocide, rape, and murder, and colonization. Until we come to Jesus with the fact that these things have happened and they still operate, they are still a ghost in this through and throughout our constitutions, we cannot collectively move together. Because I will say this time and time again, my Black experience is not, we are not in this together. If you consider yourself a white ally, you are not in this. You will not ever know what it's like to be BIPOC, especially a Black African-American or Indigenous person that has been affected by the very systemic issues that have built this country. So, you know, we really need to redefine what we call success and how we follow the money and what we're willing to live with.
Yeah.
Because the pandemic is really exposing the haves and have-nots. And guess what? The majority of even white farmers right here in Oregon are missing out. And they're realizing that white supremacy wasn't good for them in the first place. It's like eating white cake, and it was really good. It feels good for most of the white folks. They can consume it. But later in the line, you get diabetes. Folks like myself who are light-skinned or even other POC, who kind of can benefit from white supremacy, and in these systems of like, well, I got a loan from the bank, and then denying the person behind me who happens to be African American. You know, those folks die from the system of eating white cake. I get sick, I'm allergic to it. But until we collectively know what's on the table, we're going to continue to be fed this until we redesign what we want to eat. I'm done eating cake.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, there's a lot of talking right now in a way that it's not conversation, it's just talking at multiple people. But as the nation has suddenly sort of woken up collectively and been like, oh snap, there's problems here with white supremacy culture. I'm noticing a lot of folks grappling with, when we talk about white supremacy culture and its infatuation with individualism, there's a lot of confusion around what that means, you know, and I was really thinking about that when you were speaking just then, Venus. You know, a thing that we say often at the Raceme Farm Collective is like, we're all going to get free together or we're going to die trying. And I'm just determined that, like, when I kick that bucket, it's not going to be because I ate too much white cake, right? And really thinking about how that narrative. What's that? Say it again.
It's because you refused to eat that white cake and you went hungry. That's why.
Yeah, that's right. Like it's a choice. And you're giving something up, no matter what. Particularly as a Black or an Indigenous femme, like you are giving something up in the making of this choice. It's not as simple as just saying, "Well, I don't eat cake now," right? Like it's like cool, and that means there are whole days where I don't eat now. And like, what is that like? But how do we, you know, people don't want to follow the money in particular kinds of ways because of that individualism. Everybody's out here like, this is my story. I don't have to tell you this thing. I'm getting rich. I'm pulling up bootstraps. I'm doing the thing by myself, the American way. And when I think about ancestral and Indigenous ways of knowing, they are so story driven and they are so collective. And I really struggle with how narratives around hunger and food insecurity are used to help folks profit in certain ways, but they're not used to help us get back to collectivism. They're not used to help us advance a part of a food system that says you really have to be worried about what Fred Meyer cost your neighbor. And I don't know how to get us all there. How do we get back into story in a way that doesn't fall into sort of that nonprofit industrial, you know, trap of tokenizing Black and Indigenous people into story, you know?
I mean, I think this is the beginning right here. Because I think that this country is going, not to talk about Wall Street, but we're going to have to get real collective real quick, or we're going to do just what you said, Shiny, die on this hill of trying.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, if I could share too, I think like as I'm thinking about it too, and as I'm doing my own learning and being a part of, trying to be a part of solutions moving forward, like I'm seeing now that like this is really a white person problem that we have to fix too. Like it's like we are also having to be aware of ourselves. Like we created this problem. We're huge beneficiaries of this problem, but we've also like contribute to it. And like in my own self growth, I'm realizing that I had denied my privilege for a long time as a way of like separating myself from the problems and not being like, I'm just gonna be over here and try to be different. But that's actually not serving, and it's serving the systems, right? And so like thinking through, like we white people really have to figure this out to undo this. This isn't like, we're not separate. We are intrinsic to this problem, and we can be intrinsic in the solution. We have to be part of the solution moving forward.
Right.
And self-education.
And when I say white people will, the word white ally rubs me the wrong way because I don't need your help. You know, I always describe it, and I have a 12-year-old. I do talk in analogies. It's like when whiteness comes into the room, doesn't matter really if you're light skinned or white passing. When whiteness comes into the room, it's like you diarrhea in your pants and all the BIPOC see you, smell you, and other white people around you're like, oh, it's not that bad. And then you come to me and ask me to help you clean it up. I'm sorry. This is exactly what you said, Rose. This is a white issue. You're not an ally to me. I don't need help. Yeah. We're here for you as a map and a compass, a moral compass, so that you can find your humanity. So that we can get to the collective consciousness. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with white cake diabetes, like I had described. And it's not good for you and hasn't been for years, because this pandemic is shining a spotlight on the systems that we're talking about today.
I mean, y'all, like crisis opportunity paradigm is so wild, and we're living it in these really intense ways right now. This is the first time in 90 some years that most white people, since 1929, this is the first time that widespread, whiteness has questioned, I don't know where food's going to come from. Where, I'm hearing people talk about, like, my carnitas burrito is $9.75 now, and people are really tripping, and so I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we utilize that? How do we utilize this crisis moment that's happening for everybody? And in my case, right, so I run a little Black and Indigenous farmers market called Thru, and I'm using this white investment in the oh shit moment of the time to have this dialogue that says, absolutely, like, I don't need you to be an ally, but this is a capitalist system. It's your system. You bake this cake. And here's what I need you to do. I need you to show up at this market with your money and agree to be decentered, because I didn't make a market for you, and you still have to pour money into communities and into people. And so when I think about, like, at the micro level, like, what does the metric of success look like for these 24 Black and brown folks that I'm working with all the time? It looks like them figuring out how to establish value and worth within the context of that market. And we have very few rules, so to speak, at the market, but kind of the primary one, aside from wear your mask, is there is no haggling. There is absolutely no haggling. And every one of my vendor knows that I will come and escort a consumer right on out of the market the moment it starts, because there are so few spaces in this country, in this world, and there are so few spaces connected to food work where a Black or an Indigenous person gets to set a concrete dollar amount to their value, and to say, today, the heirloom tomatoes are $5. No, not $2, $5, and I will not be moved. And that's a metric of success for me, right? That everyone gets to leave and say, every other Monday, I spend 4 hours setting my worth within the context of someone else's money system, right? Within this capitalist white supremacist system, that I have the ability to walk in there, set this price, and not get moved on it. And so a lot of, the better system, again, is you show up and you pay more if you can. I have been vending for a couple of years now, and I used to always have a little BIPOC discount. Everybody who's a vendor of color figures out their way to give their people some sort of discount. And I used to be very, like, subtle about the BIPOC discount, because other white folks in line would get incensed and would walk up and be like, that's not fair. I heard you. We're having a dialogue about fair over my little bottle of tincture. Like, this is intense. But they're like, that's not fair. I saw that happen. And so my response to that was, now I will say to people, oh, and I have an I love Black people discount. Because it's really a lot harder for someone to argue their notion of fairness with that, and then to look right at them and say, and now it's $20, please pay. But I need you to pay more so we can get the medicine to the people who can't. And that's, again, what I think part of a better looking system is like, and that we have room for story. So
Yes.
at the come through market, like, you know, if folks aren't familiar or don't come from urban Black culture, then you may not be familiar with this sort of phrasing of come through, but it's more than just an invitation, right? Like it's an entire speaking to a way of being collaboratively. Like we're out here, come through, fall through, whichever your part of the United States has a slightly different, you know, variation on that. But it's also come through for the experience. You might have to listen to a whole story about that heirloom tomato to come and get it and to pay the appropriate market price for it. And it's interesting to watch the different people who come in the market environment negotiate, you know, and we've got the like watch checkers who are like, I just want to like make a loop and get my thing, you know, versus the folks who really came because they understood they were giving time to an experience that day. The experience of Black and Indigenous culture, which says it's not here to serve you or to be about you, but you're welcome to come and partake in story. And you're welcome to come and partake in these ways of interacting with each other that, yes, involve money because we are in a marketplace. But, you know, they're just, it's just different, you know, it's different in that place. And I am so elevated and made whole by being able to be a part of creating that environment that says we're here for the story and we're here for the value that you get to set. And I want to just really encourage everyone who's dropping in today to think about the places in your life, whether it's about food and land justice or not, the places in your life where you can figure out, because I think the pandemic affords us this opportunity, how to slow down just a little bit and hear a story, you know, how to slow down just a little bit and be a part of an experience without just consuming
Yes.
the thing. Right? Because these are different things. Being part of an experience is not the same thing as I go to the Black and brown market and consume them.
Right. I help them.
Yeah.
I supported
an ally.
I think we should also start thinking about that pathway of reparations. It doesn't always have to be around money. It is, like you said, partake in the experience. Our BIPOC experience is a gift. And we've always been a community of care. And so to be partaking in a BIPOC farmers market and experiencing that very community care and storytelling and in conversation is, we need to start seeing it as a direction to our humanity, because we are losing it every day. We're piece by piece. When we think about individualism, that is a piece that has been chipped away for thousands of years upon our DNA and our souls. Like, if we don't start us rejecting that idea of individualism and, you know, locking our doors, I think that this is going to be our demise if we don't start reprogramming our beliefs and reassessing our beliefs and quit just going along with what has just been told to us, what we're made to believe, who to hate, who to care for. Like I said, we'll die on that hill. So.
Absolutely. I know that I'm getting a message from Letty, who's having some tech stuff going on, but I know that they were wanting to speak to, yes, that there's white folks work to do, right? Like y'all bake that cake, and you need to go be allies to each other in the regaining of your humanity in the way that Venus is talking about. But I know that Letty was also really wanting to come and talk to us about the work that folks of color also have, right? Because we all are, if we don't have it already, we are all like white cake pre-diabetic, you know, like it's in the system in various ways. And so I know that was something that Letty was really wanting to speak to. So I just thought I would name that into the space, that like it's everybody has work to do. Absolutely. And the work is not the same.
No,
the work is not the same. And and to acknowledge or really to be more engaged than passively acknowledging, to name that like white folks are possibly more sick with this than anybody, right? Like folks of color, we are some resilient mugs, and we're gonna keep on going. And we will be the last ones to go down on the hill if this is the hill we're all dying on.
True.
You know, but like there's work for everybody in this, and part of that work is to find your people and help them, you know, get, again, as Venus said, get back to the humanity in yourself. Because when we really plug that in, I think it becomes a lot harder to go around going, I don't know what the cost of Fred Meyer is to my neighbor, right? Like when you are really, really plugged into your humanity, and I think that white supremacy culture is like a thief of humanity at every level, because you can't be fully engaged with your humanity and participate in systems that work this way. Especially the more you understand that the system was designed and it's working, you know, exactly the way that it was designed. I know that there are a couple questions, and so probably we should see, and this might be something you know, Venus, because I don't know this, but it's asking, are there particularly geographic areas in Portland that have a harder time accessing food systems? And I can speak to that a little at the statewide level, but I'm not sure.
You know, I don't know specifically Portland. I know for our rural communities, most definitely. I work closely with higher ed. And so I'm working with college students all around the state. And our rural communities have been hit the hardest. They have pantries that have been closed. They've had a very huge decline of like their volunteer work that operates those food systems, mainly around food pantries. Have declined because they're volunteers and they've chosen not to expose themselves. Specifically, the Oregon Food Bank, they had, obviously when the pandemic hit, they had a huge incline in like need, and then a big decline in like help because we didn't know what was going to happen. And at some point I was asking a legislator, when do we call in the National Guard to help dole out this food? It's like, it's such an upside down world of, we have places like Safeway or Fred Meyer's donating huge plumes of food and no one to package it and give it out. Right. And so it's just this really upside down world of like, we have an abundance of food and not a lot of bodies to help organize that. And I don't know specifically around Portland, but I do know on the state level, our rural communities have been hit the hardest. And it's not just food. It's like, you know, the clinics for getting, you know, going to see the doctor. Transportation has declined in those areas as well. I mean, just it's an array of things.
Yeah. I know, let's see, what do I know about our food systems a little bit by the numbers? I know that in the state of Oregon, 1 in 8 Oregonians are food insecure. Which means that there's 1 in 5 kids in the state of Oregon who are food insecure. There's 500 some odd thousand, you know, food insecure Oregonians. Some 200,000 of those are children, just to sort of make those real people numbers. And that rural and urban divide is really pronounced in our food systems. Within the city of Portland, right? Like you can make some assumptions about how the food systems play out based on the history of redlining and of gentrification and displacement. So while I haven't dug into it, I'm not, you know, going to be surprised to learn that east of 82nd has different and fewer food options, right? East of 82nd, if y'all don't know, east of 82nd doesn't have sidewalks. So like whole parts that are east of 82nd in the city of Portland, in Multnomah County, you know, giant liberal bastion of Oregon, whole places have been deemed that people don't need to move their bodies, right? People we know that don't own cars, people we know who take transit, maybe ride a bike if they got one to get places, including to get food, right? Like we don't even have safe means of conveyance for human bodies out there. So I think if we just follow that a little bit, we're going to find pretty quickly that we are dealing with systems of food apartheid. I know that where my best friend raised her 2 boys on Section 8 housing at the corner of 72nd and Flavel, which is commonly referred to as Felony Flats in Portland. Y'all, I'm from Oakland, so I need to first tell you that there are no ghettos in Portland. Not a one, not a single one. We got some hoods though. We have a few hoods, right? And until so until the grocery outlet arrived there, and that was recent. That's recent. Like I remember it happening in the last 7 years or so. That was absolutely like a neighborhood that was marked by food apartheid. You had like Stonewall's little corner store there, and that was most of those folks. That was their grocery. That's where you could take your Oregon Trail card, at
a high cost.
Yeah, at a very, very high cost. So I do know that if you look around for the places in Portland where whiteness does not want to live comfortably, that you are likely to find food apartheid. I also know that, and in transparency, I should name that New Seasons is a sponsor of the Come Through Market, and they give me money to try to address these issues. And also name that I tell them all the time, Black and brown communities do not trust y'all. Like, do not trust y'all for nothing. No. And that's really complicated. So part of the food systems story in Oregon to sort of address the question is also a story of leapfrogging, right? So instead of figuring out how to bring a large-scale grocery store to a particular community, we're figuring out how to bring like a bike-up only, high-end grocery store to a neighborhood that doesn't need it. In similar ways, we see those disparities happening. I live in North Portland, where arguably some of the most displacement of Black Portlanders has happened. And I've been here for 17 years, and the number of acupuncture clinics I have watched, but not people's acupuncture, but high-end, fancy pants, blue sky acupuncture. Over those 17 years, we have almost as many acupuncture clinics and such as we do have coffee shops, strip clubs, and other Portland staples. But what we don't have anywhere is an asthma clinic. And folks living close in Portland who live below the poverty line, and people who live anywhere adjacent to the poverty line that is set by our ridiculous federal government strictures, are people who live with mold and who live with asthma and breathing related concerns, right? So we do have metrics, because I don't think a lot of folks have tracked all of that out in a mapped fashion for Portland, but we do have metrics around health outcomes and health disparities that will also tell you where you're going to find the food system working hardest at the way it was designed. So anywhere you're going and you see a ton of gentrification and displacement of folks of color, find out where they ended up, and you're going to figure out where there's a food system problem playing out in their lives. I think that's the only way I really know how to answer that question. And then I see that there was a question about, I think, publications. So what are our favorite trusted books, blogs, and etc. recommendations for learning about food systems? And I don't know if, Venus, you have recommendations there about where do folks learn more about this. So we've given them just a little bit to go out there and start asking a lot of questions.
Yeah. Sure. And I'm happy to dig a little deeper. I have in some archives somewhere a few books that I can give Rose, and if you want to give it out to folks in your research, that's cool. But the one book that comes to mind, because you've said it a couple times and I really appreciate that, is The Food Apartheid. Sorry, my dog. That the fact that, can you plug it in? There's no such thing as a food desert, because more or less deserts are natural, and this is done by design, like any other apartheid. And that comes from the language around the book Farming While Black. That's a great book. I love that book. It was almost like my little Bible there for a minute, but that's one book that comes to mind. I don't know, Shani, if you have any off the top of your head. I don't know any specific ones for Oregon. I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think that there's, let me just drop that book title for Leah Penniman in the chat. I don't know about publications, but I can say that folks you want to be paying attention to and following from a sort of academic and nonprofit perspective, it's useful to keep tabs on what the Oregon Food Bank is doing. They have a lot of resources on their website. So if you're like, where's this lady rattling off these stats about numbers of hungry people and what's the difference between hunger and food insecurity and those kinds of things, you're looking to our large scale orgs that do that kind of work. At the smaller scale, pay attention to the conversations that Black Food Sovereignty Coalition is getting involved in. And Black Food Sovereignty Coalition is my sort of fiscal sponsor for running the Come Thru Market. They host the Black and Indigenous sort of food workers conference every year that's back to the root. And that's a great place to lend support. But, you know, they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. So just getting into like, what are the conversations that they're bringing forward and having who are the community partners that they're linking to and talking about. I think it's paying attention to programs that are happening. You learn a lot from just sort of scanning the programmatic landscape. So, you know, Jacobson was running Feed the Mass for quite a while there, and thinking about like, how does that work get started? What does it mean to feed the mass? And what's the work that organizations are doing there, I think is a way to sort of start to unpack that. We have organizations like EcoTrust, which do a tremendous lot of work around food system and food justice. I will name, because I think it's important to bring more transparency, right? That like EcoTrust is the kind of place you can't get a job unless you went to an Ivy League institution. So I think naming the types of people that participate in these dialogues, and EcoTrust has, you know, brilliant Black minds working for them, but just wanting to name that like, there are politics that come along with the work also. And so as you're scanning and looking for people who are having the dialogue, take note of how class plays out in the dialogue and push yourself to listen a little harder when it's coming from a less polished source. You know, I think that folks who move through higher ed, either as a student or as a worker, right? Like I'm very aware, and I suspect Venus would say a similar thing. I know that I'm palatable to whiteness. I understand with my skin privilege and my background privilege how I move in and out of spaces. So challenge yourself to listen more closely when the conversation is happening from people that don't seem to move with that proximity to whiteness, and who maybe don't have the resources, because it's just resources that somebody poured on me, y'all, that brought me to this panel and gave me a certain comfort in speaking. And so I'm asking you to listen harder when you feel less comfortable.
Yeah, Shani, I totally appreciate what you just said. I find myself in those spaces of higher ed as well, of just, moving through those systems and watching how they're like, breath, holding so much gatekeeping along that way of like how they direct student leaders. It's frustrating, and yeah, it's probably why I have so much gray hair coming in.
Word. And then, you know, like never discount, like y'all have some conversations with plants. You know, that's not an approach that everybody understands, but like push yourself to go grow something and then eat it and understand the fullness of that cycle and that relationship. Because if you get nothing else from that, you will have a story, and that allows you to come into Black and brown space and partake as opposed to consume, right? You have story too. Come and tell my farmer about that time you tried to grow a tomato. And you'll also have a more rich and full understanding of why the value of the tomato is what it is today. And no, you can't really haggle to just get 2 for $2, you know? Like, so put a seed in the ground, nurture that sucker into being whatever it will be, accept the like feeling of failure and loss that will come when it doesn't yield what you thought it would. Experience like whatever gratitude you can muster for what it did give you, and talk to that plant because it's telling you all about what's happening. It is replicating much more fully the conversation that Venus and myself and Letty were trying to bring to you today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you all for that. I think also if I could share on that resource sheet too, there's some more organizations on there like you were sharing. I think Letty was mentioning too, Mudbone Grown connections, and then Village Gardens, who couldn't be here today too. They're doing amazing work with youth as well. And also did put some things on there too for any white folks who are kind of like trying to figure out how to be a part of this and how to like be solution oriented and self-reflective. So one article that really supported some of my growth was from Indigenous Action. It's called Accomplices, Not Allies. And it really kind of laid out how white supremacy shows up in different ways in like the industrial nonprofit industrial complex, and like how like we become in hopes of like helping support people, we become sort of like saviors of people and we get in people's way, and we're not here we don't need to save anybody, we need to get out of people's way. So like everything that I'm trying to do in my own world is about getting out of people's way and getting over my own indoctrination into these systems so that I can become separate from them but be part of solutions on the outside. And then like you were saying too with Farming While Black, Soulfire Farms, in that book, they have a really great website, which I'm sure you guys know about, but for folks who don't, like accessing their action steps and their policy platforms for food sovereignty on their website has been really awesome. And seeing like, what does it look like to support change? And even though they're from New York, I find them really helpful in helping me understand like how I can apply those same kind of principles in Oregon. Because like you guys were sharing too around, it needs to happen like at a grassroots level, individual level, connecting to the herbs themselves, the plants themselves, but also on a policy level, right? Like there are people, like there are systems that are designed this way. So we have to redesign the systems. And what does that look like? And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, a lot of these things are already laid out in like really tangible, understandable ways, and we don't have to like reinvent it. And I also, as a white person, understanding like we don't need to go to all Black people asking what can we do. Like there are ways of us figuring out for ourselves and doing the education ourselves and speaking in white circles and educating each other through the resources that are already available to us. So I find Soulfire really helpful with that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks, Rose.
Any last questions out there?
Or thoughts?
Cool. Welcome back, Christine.
Hi. This was so great and so informative. And I think what I'm taking away from this is it's overwhelming to hear how much work has to get done. But it's kind of the same way I feel that I put the bookstore together, right? Like, I'm not going to be Powell's, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to do what I do, the one thing that I do. And I try to lift the next person up too. And if we just go one person at a time with a little lifting, you know, things will change. Does Come Through Market have a website?
Oh, that's on the resource list too. I hope that's okay, Shiny. And
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead, I guess, and wrap up. Is there any more questions from the audience before we say goodbye to everyone? I'm sorry Letty couldn't resolve her technical issues.
Stuff happens. We have market tomorrow from 11 to 3 at the Red on Southeast Salmon. So come through.
That sounds great. This event will be recorded if you all want to share it with someone else, someone who needs to hear it. That would be also lovely. And yeah, thanks. Rose, any last?
no, I'm really thankful for Venus and Shiny to be here, and Letty and as well. And I'm sorry that didn't work, but I'm glad you all felt comfortable sharing, and I'm really glad that you are lights in this to help us guide through how to be part of this solution. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rose, and thank you to Two Sisters and Weird Sisters, or Two Rivers and Weird Sisters.
Rivers and Weird Sisters.
Yeah, and it was really great seeing you, Shiny.
Yeah.
I'll see you again. Maybe I'll come through tomorrow. I'll just bring my computer.
I know how that is, for sure.
From the farmer's market.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.